Herb Cohen and Straight Records still believed that Tim could become a commercial artist, despite the failure of Greetings from LA.
And so the decision was made with the next record, Sophronia, to make it even more commercial. And they brought in a producer, another Frank Zappa associate, but someone who had worked on a lot of pop hits in the past, worked with the Four Seasons and so forth. And the idea was, let's really go for it this time.
So Sophronia was a very professional album. He was going in with this attitude like, okay, I'll give the producer what he wants, and there'll be good pop tunes, and then we'll also have this opportunity to stretch out. It was a mysterious album because it didn't fit really any descriptions. There was no genre.
And the result is a pretty kind of watered down, very, very slick pop, almost pop disco-y record that with very few hints of the Tim we'd heard before. He barely plays guitar on it. There's some moments on it. He finally recorded Dolphins, the Fred Neil song that he'd been singing for years, and he does a really nice version of that.
Sometimes I think about Saturday's child and all about the times when we were running wild.
For Tim Buckley to go back and do a song like Dolphins, you know, one of Fred Neil's most beautiful ballads, you know, was very appropriate and a kind of nice nod.
He and Larry Beckett had actually seen Fred Neil and his band record it back in '67 or so in a studio in Hollywood. Fred Neil was one of Tim's heroes in many ways. He was a quote-unquote folk blues singer, but didn't stick to those conventions. He was a heroin addict, which Tim dabbled with later, and he kind of made heroin seem cool. But when Tim and Larry saw Fred Neil's working out the arrangement for this song in the studio was really eye-opening for them, because he played around with different arrangements. The song was longer and shorter, and they're sitting there in the control booth watching this guy work out this song and explore all the different ways he could sing it and record it. And it was not just like, let's just go in the studio and record this song really fast and stick to this arrangement and boom, done. And so it was really eye-opening for them in that regard.
This old world may never change where it's been, and all the ways of war.
He would never miss an opportunity to sing Dolphins. Have you sung it? It's a magnificent song to sing. Just sing it one day and you'll go, oh my God, this is great. Just to be alive and singing Dolphins, you know, it's so fine.
And he sang that song in live performances right from the time that he heard Fred do it all the way down to the end, recording it in Sophronia in '73, as I mentioned. It was very nice of him to call me to participate in that recording. By that time I was doing other things. But he called me up and said, Lee, we're going to do Dolphins, and I'd really like you to play on it. It was nice of him to do that, because I had a long history with that song too. I played it with him all the way down the line, from the early days into the Sophronia period.
Dolphins was a very suitable cover, and when you see him do it on camera in a live version, that's even better, I think, than the record. It proves that he still had his vocal and interpretive talent intact.
As well as Dolphins, the album contained several other covers, including the Phil Spector-penned Sally Go Round the Roses, which had originally been a hit for the female R&B group, the Janettes.
His version of Sally Go Around the Roses is really kind of intriguing. You know, that was kind of, I mean, it was a radio hit. It's a very strange song. It's an even stranger song for a guy to be singing.
When it came to the lyric, the saddest thing in the whole wide world is to find your baby with another girl. Sally, don't you go downtown. So originally the song was sung by 3 women. So by Tim singing this song and changing the gender of that line, it created a lot of hoots and hollers in the audience. You got to figure this was a while ago.
I don't think that Tim Buckley was opposed to doing covers per se on principle. If you listen to some of the live stuff that came out posthumously, like Dream Letter, he's doing some covers in there and doing them pretty well and making them his own.
Seafronia, like Greetings from LA, failed to turn the tide and became yet another flop. However, once again, Herb Cohen decided to back another Tim Buckley record. Tragically, it was to be his swan song.
Look at the Fool basically continued in the vein of Greetings from LA and Seafronia in the sense that it was a very kind of pop-funk, very polished record. It was much more polished in a way than the two before. With Joe Falcia, his guitar player, produced it. He brought in like real studio pros like Earl Palmer, the drummer, Michael Melvoin, the keyboard player, who was the father of one of Wendy and Lisa. And the idea was to really make almost an R&B record, make a really like a sort of a white guy Al Green record. And so it has a consistency of sound start to finish that the two records before just didn't have. It really feels of a piece. And Tim is trying to be kind of more of an R&B soul guy in his singing. And the problem with the record is the songs aren't that great.
It's very sad that Look at the Fool was the last Tim Buckley album that he was able to put out, because even more than Seafronia, I think it's something that captures him in a very downward spiral. Artistically and personally, you can hear it. And I haven't heard this opinion from many other critics, but I think his voice is notably inferior to his voice on all the other albums that he did.
Each and every day, every little way, I've been loving you.
I think the title track is one of the better tracks on the record, because if he was trying to be Al Green on that record, that's the song where he nailed it. Where there's a kind of, he's stretching his voice, but in a very kind of funky, soulful way. And I think that song represents a style that he could have developed more and maybe gone in that direction. It was one of the first hint of like, that Tim could really maybe do something with that sort of R&B form that felt natural to him and where he could take it in some new direction. But it's just sort of a fleeting moment on that record, really.
I mean, depending on how psychological you want to get about it, I mean, the very title of Look at the Fool is, in a way, a kind of statement about a level of, you know, kind of personal and artistic exhaustion that Tim Buckley had reached at the point of making it.
I feel like Look at the Fool was almost out of his hands. That, you know, remember when I told you about the absolute creative control over the first two albums, especially, let's say, Goodbye and Hello. We chose the album art, you know. He chose the photograph to go on the cover. And we said we wanted the lyrics printed. It's like the inverse at the end. It's like the album art, the band, the producer, nothing is, there is no creative freedom. But that's almost a lesson to us, isn't it? I mean, you know, you give Tim Buckley his head and he's going to create something magnificent. It may not be accessible immediately. It may not be commercial. It may not be pop music at all. But it will have lasting musical value.
After Look at the Fool also flopped, Tim finally left the management of Herb Cohen. Despite being without a record contract, he began to plan several projects with Larry Beckett and seemed to be positive about his future. However, Look at the Fool was to be his last album, as Tim Buckley tragically died less than a year after its release.
What seems to have happened, according to police reports, is that he stopped by his friend's apartment in Venice. His friend took out some heroin, a brown powder, which everyone assumed was heroin. And he snorted a lot of it down, and using a rolled up dollar bill. And he died after it. And the official cause of death was a combination of alcohol and heroin.
many unanswered questions surrounding Tim's death, and in the years since, several conspiracy theories have evolved. However, what is known is that Tim tragically died in bed with his wife Judy on the 28th of June, 1975.
You know, certainly some of the songs live on, and, you know, some of the albums live on, but, you know, in a sense, the example of a kind of artistic fearlessness is what lives on the most.
You aren't lucky enough to have sat in the same room with him just in his house while he was singing. To hear that, you think, well, you know, this is just not anything to do with anything I've ever known. Somebody who can sing so passionately and with such a powerful voice, with such range, with such creative range.
Now, for me to wax eloquent, that's great, that's fine, but these are words about the sound. The sound itself is what captivated people. As a musician, as a singer, as an innovator, as a great explorer, he was indeed the greatest star sailor I've ever met.